When my boss told me she needed me to pretend to be her husband for 1 year, the first thing that fell out of my mouth was, "Do we have to sleep in the same bed?" Yeah, I actually said that to the most feared woman in our company. My name is Caleb Mercer. I am 28 years old, born in a dusty little town outside San Antonio, Texas, and for the last 5 years, I have been trying to build a life in Denver, Colorado that does not feel like slow drowning. Most days I fail. I work as a junior copywriter at Ashford and Hale Communications. Sounds impressive if you say it fast enough, at a bar like I am some creative hotshot shaping the way America thinks about brands. The truth sits in a gray cubicle on the ninth floor of a glass tower downtown, where I write taglines and social media posts that most people scroll past without a flicker of recognition. My desk faces a corkboard pinned with campaign briefs for regional beer companies and local outdoor gear shops. The coffee comes from a machine in the lobby that dispenses something brown and warm that technically qualifies as caffeinated. I have learned not to expect more from it. Every morning I ride the light rail into the city with a crowd of people who look half awake, their faces lit blue by phone screens, headphones sealing them inside private worlds I will never know. I wear the same rotation of four faded button-downs that I bought at a thrift store on South Broadway 3 years ago. The collars are starting to fray. I keep meaning to replace them the way I keep meaning to fix the crack in my windshield and the squeak in my front door. But money has a way of deciding your priorities for you, and my money decided a long time ago that survival comes before dignity. Outside the office, my life is not much shinier. I rent a one-bedroom apartment in a rough stretch of Capitol Hill where the hallways smell like cleaning products that do not clean, and someone else's cooking that never smells good. The paint on my walls is peeling in the bathroom, curling away from the drywall like it is trying to escape. The heater rattles when the temperature drops, which in Denver means roughly 8 months of the year. The neighbor's dog, a barrel-chested pit mix named Diesel, barks at what I can only assume are ghosts because nothing visible ever justifies the noise at 3 in the morning. Nights are the worst. I eat takeout burritos from the place on Colfax that stays open late, the kind wrapped in foil that leaves grease stains on whatever surface you set them down on. I sit at my secondhand kitchen table with my laptop open, and I try to write. Not copy, not taglines. Real writing, the kind my freshman English professor told me I had a gift for before I dropped out to help with bills back home. But the sentences come out strangled, half-formed things that die on the screen before they become anything worth reading. And then I open my banking app and the number there kills whatever was left of the impulse to create. The last thing I do before sleep every single night is transfer money to my mother. Her name is Diane Mercer. She is 62 years old, a retired nurse who spent 31 years on her feet in the ER at a hospital outside Austin, and she lives alone now in the house where I grew up, a 3-bedroom ranch with a porch that sags on the left side and a yard where my father's truck used to sit. The truck is gone. My father is gone. The bills he left behind are not. Frank Mercer was a mechanic, not the kind who works at a dealership with a logo on his shirt and a computer that tells him what is wrong with the engine. The kind who lies on his back on a creeper under 18-wheelers in a shop with no air conditioning, hands black with greased knuckles split open and healed over so many times the skin looked like old leather. He fixed trucks for a living until his body decided it was done being fixed itself. He started coughing in March. By June, the doctors found the mass in his left lung. By October, he could not walk to the mailbox without stopping twice to catch his breath. He died on a Tuesday in November in a hospital bed that cost $400 a day, with my mother holding one hand and me holding the other, and the last thing he said was, "My name." The bills did not die with him. They multiplied. ICU stays, chemotherapy sessions, radiation. The ambulance rides the oxygen equipment, the medications with names I still cannot pronounce. The hospital sent statements the way storms send rain, relentless and indifferent to what was already flooded. I paid what I could. I maxed out 2 credit cards. I took out a personal loan at an interest rate that should probably be illegal. I sold the tools in my father's shop, the ones he taught me to use when I was 14 years old, lying on my back beside him under a Peterbilt, his voice calm and patient as he showed me how to find the problem, by listening, by feeling, by knowing the machine the way you know a friend. I sold those tools to a guy on Craigslist who did not ask where they came from, and I did not tell him. Some losses you do not narrate, you just survive them. The total when I finally sat down and added every number together came to $52,000. That figure lives in my head like a second heartbeat, always there or always pounding, always reminding me that I am underwater and the surface is getting farther away. 2 weeks before all of this started, my landlord slid an eviction notice under my door. 3 months behind on rent, no more extensions. The paper was crisp and official looking, the kind of document that does not care about your reasons. I tried everything. Freelance writing gigs that paid $50 for 1,000 words. Selling my old camera, the Nikon that my father gave me for my 21st birthday, the one piece of equipment I owned that was actually worth something. I even texted college friends I had not spoken to in years, people whose lives had moved on to mortgages and promotions and children, and every answer came back wearing the same apologetic mask. Sorry, man, wish I could help. By the time that Monday morning came, the Monday that changed everything, I was hanging on by a thread so thin I could feel it fraying with every breath. I got to the office early because I could not sleep. My head pounded from another night of staring at the ceiling while Diesel performed his nightly concert through the wall. I dropped into my chair, pressed the power button on my monitor, and opened my email. The screen filled with what I had come to think of as the wall. Overdue notices stacked like bricks, medical bills with red stamps, credit card statements with minimum payments I could not make, a second warning from the landlord, this one with a date circled 10 days from now, the day they would change the locks. The numbers blurred together into a single accusation. You are failing. You are falling. There is nothing left to grab. I was still staring at that screen, my coffee untouched and cooling beside my keyboard, when a new message appeared at the top of the inbox. No subject line. One sentence in the preview pane. Meet me in my office, 9 o'clock sharp. The sender was Vivian Ashford, Vice President of Ashford and Hale Communications, daughter of the late Richard Ashford, who founded the company 30 years ago and built it into one of the most respected mid-sized marketing firms in the Mountain West before a heart attack took him 3 years back. The name on the building, the name on the trust, the name that made people in our office straighten their posture and lower their voices when they heard heels clicking down the hall. People called her the Ice Queen when they thought she could not hear, and sometimes when they were not entirely sure. She wore suits that looked like they had been cut by someone who understood architecture, sharp lines and dark fabrics that turned her body into a statement about control. Her hair was a perfect dark bob that never moved out of place, as if even the wind in Denver knew better than to test her. Her eyes were gray, the color of Lake Michigan in winter, and they had a way of settling on you that made grown men forget what they were saying in the middle of a sentence. I had watched it happen in meetings. A senior account manager, a man with 20 years of experience and a voice like a radio announcer, had once lost his train of thought so completely under her gaze that he excused himself to get water and did not come back for 10 minutes. She never came to happy hour. She never joined the small talk in the break room or the birthday celebrations with grocery store cake and plastic forks. She walked through the office like she owned it, which in a meaningful sense her family did, and the space she moved through seemed to reorganize itself around her conversations, dropping to whispers, eyes following her path, everyone performing a slightly better version of themselves in her proximity. I had spoken to her exactly 4 times in my years at the company. A quick comment on a tagline I wrote for a ski resort campaign. A nod during a team huddle about Q3 targets. A question about font choices on a social post that I answered with the verbal grace of someone who had just been asked to explain quantum physics in a foreign language. And once in the elevator, she asked me what floor and I said 9, and she pressed the button, and neither of us spoke for the remaining 45 seconds, which felt like 45 years. She never wasted a word. She never wasted anything. And now she wanted to see me at 9 o'clock sharp, and I could not think of a single reason that did not end with me carrying a cardboard box to the parking garage. At 8:59, I stood outside her door on the 36th floor, the executive level. The air up here was different, cooler, and quieter, as if the building itself acknowledged that the people on this floor mattered more than the people on mine. Her office was visible through a glass wall, all clean lines and negative space, a massive window behind her desk, showing the Front Range in the distance, the Rockies still wearing snow at their peaks even in late spring. I knocked. My knuckles sounded too loud against the glass. Her voice came through clear and flat. "Come in." She was behind her desk, eyes on her computer screen. Fingers still on the keyboard, as if she were finishing a thought she refused to abandon for something as trivial as my arrival. She did not stand. She did not smile. She pointed one finger at the chair across from here. "Sit." My palms were slick. I sat. I waited for the words that would end my employment, the polite corporate language that would tell me I was being let go, that my position was being eliminated, that the company wished me well in my future endeavors. Instead, she closed her laptop with a soft click, reached into a drawer, and slid a thick manila folder across the desk toward me. "Open it." I flipped the cover and my stomach dropped through the floor. Inside, arranged with the meticulous precision of someone who left nothing to chance, were copies of my life. Hospital bills from my father's treatment at St. David's Medical Center in Austin, itemized and highlighted. Bank statements showing a checking account balance that hovered near zero and occasionally dipped below it. My credit report, a document I had not looked at in months because I already knew what it said. A printout of the eviction notice from my apartment door, the same document I had read 6 times and shoved into a kitchen drawer, as if hiding it would make it less real. My throat closed. My hands tightened on the edges of the folder. "How did you get all of this?" "I hired a private investigation firm." Her voice carried no apology, no embarrassment, nothing but the calm efficiency of a woman who had identified a problem and taken steps to understand it before proposing a solution. "Hospital debt and court filings related to the eviction are public record. The credit report required your Social Security number, which the firm obtained through legal databases. You have the right to refuse to confirm any of it. I am telling you how I know because you deserve to understand the method, not because I need your permission." The distinction landed with surgical precision. She had not broken the law. She had simply operated in the space between what was legal and what was comfortable, a territory she clearly knew well. "You are in free fall, Caleb. No savings, high debt, 3 months behind on rent. You will not last another month." She spoke as if she were reading a quarterly performance review, calm and clinical, except the numbers she was reciting were not about market share or client acquisition. They were about me, my failures, my drowning. I felt exposed in a way I had never experienced in a professional setting, as if she had pulled back my skin and examined the machinery underneath and found it lacking. The anger rose hot and fast. Why look into me like this? What does this have to do with my job?" "It does not." 3 words delivered without inflection that redirected the entire conversation. "This is not about work. This is about a proposal." "A proposal." She leaned back in her chair, studying me with those gray eyes, and for the first time I noticed something behind the control, something tight and careful, like a rope pulled taut. She was not enjoying this. She was enduring it. "My father set up a trust before he died. The terms state that to maintain controlling interest in my shares and my position as vice president, I must be married by the end of this calendar year and remain married for a minimum of 12 months. If I fail to meet those terms, control of the shares and the seat transferred to my brother Marcus." I knew Marcus Ashford. Everyone in the building knew Marcus Ashford. He ran the Digital and Innovation Division, a title that sounded forward-thinking and carried real weight because the work underneath it was genuinely impressive. He had built the company's entire digital infrastructure over the past decade, taken their online presence from an afterthought to a revenue stream that accounted for 40% of total billings. He was tall, expensively dressed, equipped with a smile that could charm a room and eyes that could empty one. People said he wanted Vivian's job and would do anything to get it. Vivian's voice shifted, losing a fraction of its steel, gaining something I had not heard from her before, something that sounded almost like honesty. "Marcus is not a simple villain, Caleb. He built the digital side of this company from nothing. 10 years of work. My father never acknowledged it the way he should have. Marcus believes Dad favored me because I am the eldest, because I remind him of himself, and frankly, he is not entirely wrong about that. But the way Marcus plays the game is something I cannot accept." The room was quiet. The Rocky Mountains held their position outside the window, indifferent to the human calculations happening 36 floors above the street. "I am not going to let that happen," she continued, and the steel returned. "But I also do not want a real marriage built on the wrong foundation. That is where you come in." The words arrived in my brain, and my brain refused to process them. Me, I need a husband. On paper, 12 months, no more, no less. We marry, we live together, we attend events as a couple. When the year ends, we dissolve it cleanly. No claim on my assets, no shared accounts, no complications. She paused and I could see her measuring me, calculating what number would close the deal. In return, I clear all of your debts, medical, rent, credit cards, every dollar. And I pay you $100,000 at the end of the term so you can start over. The air in the room changed pressure. I could hear my own pulse in my ear, a steady thumping that sounded like a countdown. This is insane, I said it softly, almost to myself. You do not even know me. I know enough. Something in her eyes sharpened, and I realized she had been waiting for this objection, had prepared for it the way she prepared for everything. I have watched you for a while, Caleb. You work hard, you do not stir drama, you do not boast. You are desperate, but you still show up every day and do your job. I need someone I can trust not to use this against me. Someone who has something to lose if they break the rules. The assessment was brutal in its accuracy. She had not just investigated my finances. She had studied me, observed me, built a profile of who I was and what I could be relied upon to do under pressure. I was not her first choice because I was special. I was her first choice because I was controllable. This is a marriage, I said, and the word felt strange in my mouth, heavy and foreign. Even if it is fake, people will talk. Your family, the board, human resources. What do I tell my mother? What do you tell yours? We tell them the story we want them to hear. Vivian's voice was even practiced, the voice of a woman who had rehearsed this conversation in her head dozens of times before having it out loud. I have already consulted with my personal attorney, not the company's counsel, about the legal risks. HR has been informed that I am entering a personal relationship with an employee, and they require that you transfer to a different department so that you no longer report to me directly or indirectly. That is a condition, not a request. You would move to the content strategy team under a different manager. The rest is image, and I am very good at image. Her confidence frightened me as much as it impressed me. She had thought of everything. She had anticipated my objections before I could form them. She had built this plan the way she built campaigns, with research and positioning and a clear understanding of the target audience. And in this case, the target audience was me. I am not asking you to decide now, she added. And for the first time, her voice carried something that might have been compassion, or at least a close cousin of it. Think about it. If you say no, this folder disappears and we never speak of it again. If you say yes, your life changes. So does mine. I looked down at the folder in my lap. My father's name on hospital invoices, numbers in red ink, the eviction notice with its circled date 10 days away. I thought about my mother in that house in Texas, the house where my father's absence was a physical thing, a weight in every room, a silence where his voice used to be. What about us? I asked quietly. In private, what are the rules? Her eyes met mine and something moved behind them, quick and private. We will have a written contract, boundaries specified. You will have your own room, your own space. This is not about romance, it is about survival. Nobody owes you anything. You want something, go earn it. But when someone gives you a chance, do not waste it. The words rose up from somewhere below my conscious mind, my father's voice rough and certain the way it sounded when he handed me a wrench under the hood of a Peterbilt on a Saturday afternoon when I was 14 and the Texas heat was pressing down on us like a hand. I did not realize I was hearing it until it was gone. And then the question that had been bouncing inside my skull since she first said the word husband jumped out before I could catch it. Do we have to sleep in the same bed? For the first time since I walked into that office, something like surprise crossed her face. It broke through the armor for half a second, quick enough that if I had blinked, I would have missed it. Then to my absolute shock, she laughed. Not the polished laugh she used at board presentations. A real one, short and warm and human, the sound of a woman who had spent weeks constructing this moment and had not anticipated that particular question. No, she said, and the smile lingered at the corners of her mouth for one more beat before she reassembled herself. We do not have to sleep in the same bed. When I left her office, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I rode the elevator down 27 floors, and I do not remember a single one of them. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and email chains and a campaign revision for a brewery in Fort Collins that needed a new social strategy, and I nodded at the right times and typed the right words, and none of it was real. The only real thing was the folder and the number and the question and the fact that Vivian Ashford, the woman half the building was afraid to make eye contact with, had laughed at something I said. That night, back in my apartment, I paced the worn carpet until the fibers seemed to protest under my feet. The eviction notice sat on the kitchen counter where I had moved it from the drawer because hiding it was a luxury I could no longer afford. I picked it up and read it again. 10 days. At 2 in the morning, I called my mother. The phone rang 4 times before she answered, her voice thick with sleep and the particular worry that only mothers carry, the kind that never fully shuts off even when their children are grown and gone. Caleb, you okay, baby? I'm fine, Mom. The lie came out smooth and practiced, the same lie I had been telling her for months. I'm fine. Work is good. Denver is great. Don't worry about me. The lie I inherited from my father, who told her he was fine, right up until the coughing started and the weight dropped and the lie became too heavy to carry. How are you feeling? I asked, because asking about her was easier than talking about myself, and because I had heard the cough on our last call, the one she blamed on seasonal allergies, in a voice that fooled neither of us. Oh, just the usual. Allergies acting up. There it was. The Mercer family talent for denial, passed down like eye color or blood type, each generation telling the next that everything was fine while the house burned around them. I listened to her breathe. Somewhere through the phone, I could hear the creak of the porch, and I knew she was sitting out there in the dark in the chair beside the empty one where my father used to sit, looking at the yard where his truck used to be, and the emptiness of it hit me in the chest like a fist. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. Get some sleep. I hung up. I looked at the framed photo on my nightstand. Frank and Diane Mercer standing in front of his truck, both of them squinting into the sun, both of them smiling like the future was something they could trust. My father's hands were visible in the photo, thick and dark, with decades of grease that never fully washed off, and I could almost feel them. Could almost feel him guiding my fingers to the right bolt, saying, "Listen, feel it, you will know when it is right." Pride told me the proposal was wrong, that I would be selling myself, that no man with any self-respect would agree to be purchased like a piece of furniture to fill an empty space in someone else's plan. Desperation showed me my mother's house with a foreclosure notice on the door, showed me my father's medical bills with their red stamps and final warnings, showed me the eviction date circled and approaching like a train I could hear but could not see. By dawn, the choice was sitting in my chest like a stone, heavy and immovable, and already decided. At 9 o'clock, I was back in Vivian's office. She watched me close the door behind me. She was wearing a different suit today, charcoal instead of navy, and her hair was exactly the same, and the Rocky Mountains were exactly the same through the window behind her, and I realized that everything else in the world was going to keep being exactly the same while my life split into a before and an after. I will do it. I will be your husband for 1 year. Something eased in her shoulders. Not relief exactly. More like the release of a breath she had been holding since yesterday, or maybe longer. Maybe since the day she read her father's trust documents and realized the trap he had built around her future. She opened a drawer, took out a document neatly printed and bound, and placed it on the desk between us. Then sign. I picked up the pen. My hand did not tremble, which surprised me. I expected some physical manifestation of the magnitude of what I was about to do. But my fingers were calm, trained by years of holding wrenches in tight spaces where a slip meant skinned knuckles or worse. I signed my name. The pen scratched across the paper and the sound was final, a small noise that carried the weight of everything I was leaving behind and everything I was walking into. I did not know yet if I had saved myself from drowning or tied myself to something that would pull me deeper. The same afternoon, my life shifted like someone had pulled the floor out and replaced it with glass. Vivian did not waste time. She never wasted anything. She slid a white envelope across the desk containing a keycard and an address. Her building. Penthouse floor. Pack what you need. A driver will pick you up at 5. That fast? One nod. The sooner we start, the more natural it will look by the time my family and the board start asking questions. No handshake, No welcome to the family, just a sharp nod and a clear path forward. That was Vivian. Back at my apartment, packing took less time than it should have for a man dismantling his entire living situation. 2 suitcases. That was the volume of my life. Shirts and jeans, a few paperback books with cracked spines, my laptop 3 years old and running on determination, the framed photo of my parents in front of the truck. I stood in the middle of the living room and looked at the bare walls, at the pale rectangle where the cheap poster had hung at the kitchen counter with its ring stains and its eviction notice. This place had never felt like home, but it had been mine, and there is a difference between choosing to leave and being carried out by circumstances you cannot control. For one long moment, I thought about tearing up the contract, calling Vivian and telling her I changed my mind. Then I pictured my mother's house, the house where I learned to walk and where my father taught me to throw a football in the backyard and where the porch light stayed on every night I was away because Diane Mercer never stopped waiting for her family to come home. I pictured that house with a bank notice on the door and my mother standing on the sagging porch with nowhere else to go. At 5 on the dot, a black SUV pulled to the curb. The driver knew my name. The ride downtown felt like a one-way trip to another planet, the buildings getting taller and shinier as we moved from Capitol Hill into the glass and steel core of the city. The penthouse occupied the top floor of a tower in the heart of downtown Denver. The elevator required the keycard to move. When the doors opened, I stepped into a space that looked like it had been designed by someone who found comfort suspicious. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides showing the city sprawling south toward the tech corridor and the mountains holding their ancient positions to the west. White walls, gray leather couches, clean lines, no clutter, no photographs, no evidence that a human being lived here rather than simply occupied it. Vivian stood by the kitchen island with a tablet in her hand. She had changed from the suit into a simple blouse and dark pants, but she still carried herself like she was about to walk into a boardroom, spine straight, chin level, every molecule arranged for maximum authority. Your room is down that hall, second door on the left. Closet is empty. Bathroom is yours. We will need to stage some of your things quickly so it looks lived in. Photos, mail, personal items. I nodded, trying not to stare at the view. The city was laid out below us like a circuit board lights beginning to flicker on as the afternoon faded, and beyond it the mountains were turning purple in the distance, and the scale of it, the sheer vertical distance between this apartment and the one I had left 2 hours ago, made my chest tight in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. This place is big. She glanced around as if she were seeing it for the first time, as if the square footage and the view and the silence were details she had stopped noticing long ago. It is practical, close to the office, secure. It did not feel practical to me. It felt like a glass box in the sky, beautiful and sterile, and very far from the ground. She slid a thick binder across the counter. Read this tonight. Memorize as much as you can. I opened it and blinked. The first page was labeled Public Behavior Guidelines. There were sections on everything. How to stand beside her at events, where to position my hand for photographs, what to say if someone asked how we met. There was a paragraph about wine glass etiquette. There was a subsection on appropriate physical contact in public settings with annotations about frequency and duration and the importance of appearing natural while following a script. This is intense. It has to be. Her voice dropped half a register, and I heard something underneath the efficiency, something that sounded like fear wearing a professional disguise. My brother is waiting for any crack he can find. We cannot give him one. I flipped to the next section. Our history. The fake story of our relationship laid out in clean, simple lines designed to be memorized and repeated until they felt true. We met at a charity gala in Telluride 6 months ago. We hit it off instantly. We kept things quiet because we did not want office gossip. We had a small private ceremony out of town with only close family present. You already told your family. Some of them. I told my mother I met someone serious. She was surprised but pleased. The rest will expect proof soon. And what about my mom? You tell her what you are ready to tell her, but understand this, Caleb. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that was not professional, was not strategic, was something closer to the bone. If this blows up, it hurts both of us. You are not just a prop in my life. You are tied to it. There was a small crack on the last word, almost imperceptible, the kind of fracture you would miss if you were not paying close attention. But I was paying close attention because paying attention was the only thing I had brought with me into this arrangement, and what I heard in that crack was a woman who was not as unbreakable as she needed everyone to believe. Any questions? I wanted to ask how she slept at night with this much pressure on her shoulders. I wanted to ask if she was scared. I wanted to ask about the photographs that were missing from the walls of this enormous apartment, the absence of evidence that Vivian Ashford had a life outside of work and strategy and control. Instead, I said, not yet. That first night felt like sleeping in a museum. My room, which Vivian called the guest room, with the practiced ease of someone who had never had a guest, was twice the size of my Capitol Hill apartment. The bed was enormous, the sheets crisp and white, and smelling of detergent that probably cost more than my grocery budget. The walk-in closet contained more empty space than I had ever had access to in my life, and I lined up my worn shirts on the hangers like soldiers who had shown up to the wrong war. Dinner was sushi ordered on Vivian's phone, delivered in neat boxes to the long dining table. She ate while answering emails on her laptop, her chopsticks moving with the same precision she applied to everything else. I picked at a California roll and stared at the city lights and tried to process the fact that 12 hours ago, I was facing eviction, and now I was eating raw fish on the 38th floor of a building I could not have afforded to park near. We made small talk about work, industry trends, a client pitch that was struggling. The kind of conversation two colleagues might have over lunch, except we were sitting at a table that seated 12 and neither of us mentioned the contract or the rings or the fact that as far as the legal system of the state of Colorado was concerned, we would soon be married. By 10, she said goodnight and disappeared down the hall into the master bedroom at the opposite end of the apartment. I heard the door close. Not a slam. A click. Controlled like everything she did. I lay awake for a long time listening to the building. No creaking pipes. No neighbor's dog. No sirens or shouting through thin walls. Just the hum of expensive machinery keeping the temperature perfect, and the distant whisper of traffic 40 floors below, sounds so faint they were almost silence. And the silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt like choreography. Mornings we rode the elevator down together. In the lobby, Vivian would step a fraction closer, her hand brushing my arm, a gesture small enough to look unconscious and precise enough to be deliberate. If anyone from the building was watching, they saw a couple new and private and still figuring out how to be public about it. In the office, we kept our distance. She stayed Vivian Ashford, P sharp and focused and untouchable. I stayed Caleb from Content Strategy, the guy who had recently transferred departments, and wrote campaign briefs and tried not to stare at his fake wife in the hallways. The transfer had happened fast. HR moved me to the Content Strategy team under a manager named Bill Whitaker, a good-natured man in his 50s who wore flannel shirts under his blazer and quoted old Broncos stats during meetings. He did not ask why I had been moved. He just handed me a stack of briefs and told me the coffee on the 11th floor was better than the 9th. It was, marginally. At night, Vivian and I often arrived at the penthouse at different times. Some days she beat me home, heels already off by the door, blazer draped over the back of a kitchen stool, and I would find her standing at the window with her phone pressed to her ear, her voice low and fierce in a way I never heard at the office, fighting battles I was not invited to witness. Other days, I would come in first and sit on the gray leather couch and read the binder she had given me, memorizing details of a relationship that existed only on paper, learning the story of a love that was supposed to sound true. One evening, about 3 weeks in, I came home and noticed the kitchen faucet was dripping. A slow, steady leak from the base of the handle, the kind of thing that would cost a fortune to have a plumber fix in a building like this. I opened the cabinet under the sink, found the shutoff valve, grabbed a wrench from the small toolkit I had packed, and had the problem fixed in 12 minutes. A worn washer. My father had taught me to replace them before I was old enough to drive. Vivian came home an hour later. She set her bag on the counter, reached for the faucet to fill a glass of water, and paused. She turned the handle. No drip. She looked at the faucet, then at me. She did not say anything, but something in her expression shifted, a small recalibration, as if she were updating an internal file she kept about who I was and what I was capable of, and the new entry did not match the previous version. Then came our first real test, a company gala at a hotel in downtown Denver, the kind of event where everyone who mattered in the Colorado business community would be present and watching. Vivian had a dress delivered to the penthouse in a tailored suit for me, dark charcoal with a narrow lapel that fit better than anything I had ever worn. I stood in front of the mirror in my borrowed room and barely recognized the man looking back. The suit changed my posture, my proportions, the way I held my shoulders. It turned me into someone who might plausibly belong beside Vivian Ashford at a black tie event. The illusion was convincing enough to fool everyone except me. When Vivian stepped out of her room, I forgot how to speak for a full 3 seconds. Black gown that moved with her like water diamonds at her ears, catching the light hair swept back from her face in a way that revealed the architecture of her jaw and neck, and made her look like a different person, or maybe the same person with one fewer wall between her and the world. She looked colder and somehow more human at the same time, the way a mountain looks when the clouds clear and you realize how close you are to something enormous. Ready, one word delivered like a challenge. I swallowed. I hope so. At the ballroom, we stepped into a sea of light and noise and money. Music played from a string quartet. Glasses clinked. Conversations layered over each other like waves. People turned to watch us enter, and Vivian slipped her arm through mine, her fingers resting lightly on my sleeve, her body angled toward me in a way that spoke of comfort and intimacy and all the things we did not actually share. "This is where you smile," she murmured without looking at me. So I smiled, and we moved through the room. I shook hands with people whose watches cost more than my annual salary. I repeated our story with a naturalness that surprised me. Charity gala and Telluride. Kept things private at first. She spilled her drink on my shirt, and I have not recovered since. People laughed. Some looked envious. Some looked skeptical. Everyone looked convinced. And then I met Marcus. He appeared at my elbow like a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment, tall and broad-shouldered, in a suit that probably had a name I could not pronounce. His smile wide and warm, and completely disconnected from the calculation in his eyes. "So, you are the lucky man my sister finally let into her life." I took his hand. His grip was deliberately too tight, the kind of handshake designed to test rather than greet, and I matched it without thinking, my mechanic's hands doing what they had always done, holding firm against pressure. "Caleb Mercer, nice to meet you." "Oh, I know who you are." The smile did not move. The eyes did. They tracked across my face, my suit, my posture, cataloging everything, looking for the seam where the costume met the man. Junior copywriter, modest background, impressive jump into the family. Vivian moves fast when she wants something. Vivian's hand on my arm tightened. Not much, enough for me to feel the message. "Stay steady." Then Marcus leaned closer, and his voice dropped to a register meant for me alone. "I built the digital side of this company from nothing. 10 years. My father never called me on my birthday. Not once, he called her." He straightened, and the public smile returned like a mask being repositioned. "I look forward to getting to know you better, Caleb. We should talk sometime, man to man." The words were friendly. The temperature behind them was not. I understood in that moment that Marcus Ashford was not simply ambitious. He was wounded, and his wounds had calcified into something strategic and patient and far more dangerous than simple greed. He believed he had been cheated out of what he deserved, and the worst part was that he might not be entirely wrong. Back at the penthouse that night, Vivian kicked off her heels by the door and poured herself a glass of wine. She did not usually drink in front of me. The glass caught the light from the city below, turning the liquid into something that looked like captured sunset. "He does not believe it." Her voice was quiet, stripped of its corporate armor. "Marcus. He thinks he can prove this is fake. He will dig. He will watch. He will push." I leaned against the kitchen island across from her. "Then we give him nothing to find." Her eyes met mine. For the first time since this began, they were not steel and strategy. There was something raw there. Tired. A little sad. The eyes of a woman who had been carrying a weight she could not put down and could not admit she was holding. "You did well tonight." She said it quietly, like a confession rather than a compliment. "You looked like you belonged." That is the suit talking. It did most of the work. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, quick and unguarded. And for 1 second, I saw the woman who had laughed in her office when I asked about the bed, the woman who existed behind the VP and the sharp suits. You do not give yourself enough credit, Caleb. You handled the questions. You kept your composure with Marcus. That matters. It was a simple compliment. It should not have hit as hard as it did, but I was not used to praise that felt real praise that came from someone who had no reason to offer it except that it was true, and the warmth of it caught me off guard like stepping out of shade into sunlight you did not expect. As weeks turned into months, the cracks in her armor widened by fractions I could measure, only because I was closer to her than anyone else in her life, which was both the point and the problem. One night I woke up thirsty and walked out to the kitchen. The city was dark outside the hour, somewhere between late and early, and a single lamp glowed in the living room. Vivian sat on the couch in a t-shirt and loose pants, her laptop open, her shoulders slumped, one hand pressing against her temple, as if holding her head together by force. You okay? She looked up, and for a moment her face was completely open. No mask, no calculation. Just a tired woman in comfortable clothes far from the corner office, and the glass walls stripped of everything except exhaustion and the particular loneliness of people who have made themselves too strong to ask for help. Fine. The word came out automatically, a reflex, and she heard it for the lie it was. She sighed. Just a lot on my plate. I poured a glass of water and set it on the table in front of her. Drink. You look like you have been staring at that screen for hours. A short laugh, almost involuntary. You are not wrong. She took a sip and leaned back against the cushions, and the motion softened. Her made her smaller, more human, less like the woman who commanded boardrooms, and more like someone who might actually need a glass of water, handed to her by someone who noticed she was struggling. How is your mother? The question came out of nowhere, aimed at me with a specificity that told me she had been thinking about it, carrying it, waiting for a moment quiet enough to ask. It caught me off guard. I had mentioned Diane once in passing early in the arrangement, and I did not think Vivian had been listening. She was always listening. She is hanging in there, still in Texas, still trying to act like she is fine on her own. You miss her. Every day. Vivian nodded slowly, and her eyes went somewhere distant, somewhere I could not follow. I know that feeling. Missing someone who is still alive but far away. Wondering if the distance is geography or something you built yourself. For a moment, our eyes met, and the penthouse shrank. The glass walls disappeared. The city lights faded. It was just two people sitting in the quiet aftermath of their own choices, recognizing something in each other that they had not expected to find: a shared fluency in the language of loss and the particular exhaustion of carrying everything alone, because you convinced yourself that asking for help was the same as admitting defeat. That small exchange changed the air between us in ways I did not immediately recognize. The penthouse started to feel less like a stage set and more like a strange shared shelter, a place where two people who had agreed to pretend were accidentally starting to be real. We were still performing in public, every touch calculated, every smile calibrated. But in private, when the elevator doors closed and the key card beeped and the world outside stopped watching, something quieter was forming. Not romance, not yet. Something more tentative than that. The recognition that the person across the kitchen island, the person you were contractually obligated to tolerate for 12 months, might actually be someone worth knowing. Then the email landed, Tuesday afternoon, 2 months into the arrangement. Vivian's jaw clenched when she read it. Family retreat at the Ashford estate to celebrate the pending merger acquisition. The subject line was warm and corporate. The implication was a test. They want us both there, she said, and her voice was flat in a way that meant she was controlling something underneath it. My mother, the board members, Marcus, everyone. Us, I repeated, as in the happy married couple, as in the couple who met in Telluride, married quickly, and are still very much in love. They will expect proof, Caleb. Physical comfort, shared intimacy. We will be given one room, one bed, no separate guest wing. My heart rate picked up, and I forced myself to breathe the way my father used to tell me to breathe when an engine problem seemed impossible, slow and steady, because panic never fixed anything. And Marcus. He will be watching, she said. He will look for any sign that this is not real. As we drove into the foothills that Friday, the city falling away behind us and the trees rising on both sides of the road, and the big stone house coming into view, at the end of a long gravel drive, my stomach tightened into a knot I could not untie. I was about to pretend to share a bed with my boss in front of her entire family in a house that belonged to people who had more money in their wine cellar than I had earned in my entire life. But what I did not know yet, what I could not have predicted as the car rolled to a stop and the gravel crunched beneath the tires and Vivian squeezed my hand once quick and hard, was that inside that old house under the eyes of people who doubted us and a brother who was hunting for proof, the line between pretending and something real was about to become so thin that neither of us would be able to see it anymore. If I said I was calm walking into the Ashford family estate, I would be lying with the kind of confidence that only desperate men can manufacture. The house rose from the foothills like something carved rather than built, stone walls softened by decades of Colorado weather windows, reflecting the late afternoon sky, a lawn so precisely maintained it looked artificial. Cars lined the circular drive, German and British machines, polished to mirrors, and among them the black SUV we had arrived in looked almost humble, which meant it only cost twice what I used to make in a year. Vivian's hand found the inside of my elbow as we approached the front entrance. Her grip was firm, the kind of hold that communicated something different than affection. She was steadying both of us, anchoring the performance before the curtain rose. We are married, we are comfortable, we belong here. Her voice barely carried past the space between us, each word a command disguised as a reminder. Married, comfortable, belong. I repeated it like a pre-flight checklist, aware that the margin for error had just narrowed to nothing. The front door opened before we reached it. Catherine Ashford stood in the frame wearing a soft blue dress that managed to look both simple and expensive, silver hair cut close to her jawline, eyes that held the same gray as her daughter's, but carried an additional layer, something evaluative and maternal and not entirely warm. I knew immediately where Vivian had learned to study people before speaking to them. Vivian, her voice split the difference between greeting and assessment, and this must be Caleb. I stepped forward and extended my hand, meeting her gaze directly, because my father had taught me that you look people in the eye when you introduce yourself, regardless of how much money they have. It is very nice to meet you, Mrs. Ashford. Her handshake was brief but deliberate, her fingers cool her attention, moving across my face with the focused precision of someone reading a document for errors. Whatever she found, she stored without comment. Call me Catherine, come in both of you. The interior carried the particular weight of generational wealth that does not need to announce itself. Family photographs ascending the staircase wall in chronological order, starting with black and white images of a young Richard Ashford and ending with more recent color portraits where the absent patriarch was replaced by empty spaces that no one had thought to fill. Bookshelves stretched floor to ceiling in the hallway, packed with titles that had actually been read, spines cracked and pages softened. The smell of roasted meat drifted from somewhere deeper in the house, mixing with furniture, polish, and old wood, and the combination felt more like a home than anything I had encountered since leaving Texas. In the main living room, they were waiting. Aunts and uncles and cousins I had memorized from the binder, but never met board members whose faces I recognized from the company website, all of them holding drinks in crystal glasses and conducting conversations in the particular register of people who are comfortable with money and suspicious of strangers. The noise deepened when we entered. Eyes tracked us with varying degrees of curiosity and judgment, and I felt each gaze like a separate weight being placed on a scale. Marcus separated from the group first. He crossed the room with a stride that projected ease, while his eyes performed surgery, cutting through the surface of my suit and my posture and my rehearsed smile to whatever lay beneath. Sis, he brushed a kiss against Vivian's cheek with the mechanical warmth of a diplomat greeting a foreign official. And the famous husband, Caleb. His hand closed around mine with the same crushing deliberation as the Gallowbones testing bones, and I held my ground because backing down from a handshake was something Frank Mercer's son did not do. She keeps me on my toes. I like it that way. A few people within earshot chuckled. Marcus absorbed the response, filed. It moved on. An older board member, a man with a silver beard, and the confident posture of someone who had been making consequential decisions since before I was born, stepped into the opening. We have been eager to hear more about you. Tell us, how did you two meet? Vivian has been extraordinarily private. I glanced at Vivian, the smallest nod almost imperceptible. Permission granted. I let the rehearsed story unspool with a casualness I had practiced in the bathroom mirror until it no longer sounded rehearsed. Charity event in Telluride. I was there helping with branding for one of the sponsors. She bumped into me near the bar and managed to dump half a glass of red wine down the front of my only good shirt. I figured anyone who could do that and only apologize once was someone I wanted to know. Laughter rippled through the group. Vivian rolled her eyes with a precision that looked almost playful, a performance within the performance that was more convincing than anything I could have scripted. He exaggerates, she offered. But yes, Telluride was the beginning. In such a quick marriage, a woman in her 60s observed her tone, suspended between congratulation and interrogation. I squeezed Vivian's hand because the binder said physical contact at moments of emotional declaration reinforced authenticity. But the truth was I squeezed it because the next words coming out of my mouth needed an anchor. Life is short. I was not going to waste time pretending I did not know what I wanted. And when I said it, Vivian's fingers tightened around mine in a way that was not in any binder. A fraction of a second, barely measurable. But I felt it travel up my arm and settle somewhere in the center of my chest. And for a disorienting moment, the scripted line did not feel scripted at all. Dinner was served at a long table that could seat 20 and held 14. Wine was poured by someone whose job it was to pour wine. Courses arrived and departed with silent efficiency. Around me, the conversation flowed in currents I was learning to navigate business and family and the carefully maintained fictions that wealthy people use to avoid discussing the things that actually divide them. Marcus chose his moment between the main course and dessert when the wine had loosened the room enough to make cruelty feel like humor. He swirled his glass and aimed a smile at me across the table. So, Caleb, you jumped from a rough background into this family at impressive speed. Must feel like winning the lottery. Every head at the table adjusted by degrees. The question was a blade wrapped in small talk designed to cut without leaving a visible wound. I could feel Vivian stiffen beside me, feel the micro-tension in her posture that meant she was preparing to intervene, and I placed my hand on hers under the table because this one was mine to handle. I feel lucky, but not because of money. Marcus raised an eyebrow, inviting elaboration with the patience of someone who believed the next sentence would contain the mistake he was waiting for. I looked at Vivian. She was watching me with an expression I had not seen before, something between caution and curiosity, as if she genuinely did not know what I was about to say. Because your sister is the toughest person I have ever met. She builds more in a week than most people do in a year. Being beside someone like that makes you want to be better. Not richer, not more comfortable, better. The table went quiet. Forks paused. Marcus's smile thinned by a degree that only I was close enough to measure. Catherine at the head of the table allowed a small expression to cross her face that was not quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood, and the tension in the room relaxed by a fraction. After dinner, as the group dispersed toward the parlor for drinks, one of the board members found his car would not start in the drive. The battery most likely drained by the interior lights left burning during the meal. 3 men in suits stood around the open hood with the baffled authority of people who managed billions of dollars and could not identify a positive terminal. I walked out without thinking about it. I asked for jumper cables, found a set in the estate's garage, connected them to the SUV we had arrived in, and had the engine turning over inside of 6 minutes. The task was nothing. A dead battery is the simplest problem an engine can present. But the 3 board members stood watching with the particular fascination that educated men show when confronted with a practical skill they do not possess. The one with the silver beard clapped me on the shoulder. You know your way around an engine. My father taught me. He fixed trucks for a living. 30 years under the hood. I said it without apology and without qualification because Frank Mercer's work was worth more than any title on any business card in that house. And if these men could not see the dignity in a mechanic's hands, then their judgment was not worth courting. But they could see it. Something in the way I spoke about my father, the plainness of it, the absence of shame, registered as a quality they respected, even if they could not name it. A maid led us upstairs after the evening wound down. The room at the end of the hall was large and warm, lit by a single lamp, in the glow of a dying fire in a stone hearth. Thick rug, heavy curtains, paintings of landscapes that might have been valuable or might have been decoration. And one bed wide and neatly made exactly as Vivian had warned. "Your room, Mrs. Ashford. If you need anything, just call." The door closed behind us with a click that sounded louder than it should have. Well, I looked at the bed, then at the fireplace, then at the bed again. At least it is big enough that we could fit a small country between us. Vivian sat on the edge of the mattress, and the controlled architecture of her posture finally collapsed. Her shoulders dropped. Her hands fell to her lap. She stared at them as if they held an answer she could not read. "He will not stop. Marcus, he will keep pushing until he finds something he can use." I sat beside her, not touching. Close enough to feel the warmth of her presence, the particular energy of a person who has been performing strength all day and has reached the point where the performance requires more effort than the strength itself. He is fishing. That means he does not have anything solid. He will. Her voice carried the exhausted certainty of someone who had been outmaneuvered before and recognized the early moves of the pattern. He is good at digging. He has always been good at digging. Vivian. I said her name quietly, and the sound of it in this room, in this context, stripped of the professional distance that usually surrounded it, felt different, heavier, more real. "You do not have to carry this alone anymore. Maybe I started as a hire, but I am here now. I am in this with you." Her eyes lifted to mine, and the firelight caught them, turning the gray into something warmer, something closer to silver. She searched my face the way she had studied me that first day in her office, looking for the calculation, the angle, the hidden cost. Whatever she found this time, it made the searching stop. "You really mean that?" I meant every word at that table tonight. I meant it when I signed the contract, and I mean it now even more. Her hand reached for mine. Her fingers were cool and trembling slightly, and the trembling was the most honest thing she had shown me since the arrangement began. More revealing than the laughing in her office, more vulnerable than the late-night confession about missing someone far away. This was Vivian Ashford, with every wall lowered, every defense offline, reaching for someone, not because she had calculated the benefit, but because she needed to. "Thank you." The word came out as a whisper, quiet enough that the fire almost swallowed it. The space between us felt charged, the air dense with something that had been building for weeks and had finally found a room small enough, in a moment quiet enough to make itself known. I knew I should pull back. Keep the line clear. This was a contract, a transaction, a business arrangement with an expiration date printed in ink. But sitting there with her guard down, her hand in mine, the firelight making everything feel both more fragile and more permanent than it should have, I could not see any lines anymore. "Caleb." Her voice was low, barely a breath. "If this were real, if there were no contract, no trust, no money, would you still be here with me?" The question landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples went everywhere. There was only one honest answer. Yes, I would. Her breath caught. Then, slowly giving me every opportunity to retreat, she leaned in. I met her halfway. The kiss was soft at first, uncertain, both of us testing the boundary we were about to cross. When neither of us pulled back, it deepened, her hand sliding to the side of my neck, my hand finding the curve of her waist, in the contract, in the trust, in the $100,000, in the 12-month timeline, dissolved into something that had no terms and no conditions and no exit clause. It was not scripted. It was not staged. It was not for Marcus or the board or Catherine or anyone else in that house. It was two people who had been pretending for so long they had forgotten what honesty felt like, rediscovering it in the worst possible place, at the worst possible time, in the most inconvenient way imaginable. We did not speak for a while after that. The night unfolded in quiet breaths and the sounds of the old house settling around us. No cameras, no audience, just two people who had walked into an arrangement expecting nothing and found something neither of them had planned for. Later, when we lay still, her head resting against my chest and the fire burned down to embers, she spoke into the near darkness. "That was not part of the contract." "No, it was not." "Do you regret it?" "Not for a single second." A long pause. I thought she had fallen asleep when her voice came again muffled against my shirt, small and certain. Neither do I. Morning came through the curtains in pale gold slats. For a disoriented moment, waking up with her warmth curled against me felt natural, felt like something I had been doing for years rather than hours. Then Vivian sat up and her attention snapped to the dresser across the room with the precision of someone whose instincts never fully slept. On the edge of the lamp, so small it was nearly invisible, a tiny black disc no bigger than a shirt button. She swung her legs off the bed and crossed the room in 3 strides. Her fingers plucked it free. A wireless camera. A pinpoint red light blinked once before she pressed the power contact and killed it. My stomach dropped through the floor and kept falling. Is that what I think it is? Marcus? Her voice had gone flat and cold, every trace of the woman from last night sealed behind blast doors. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. From fury so controlled, it was almost worse than screaming. She pulled her phone from the nightstand and dialed. The call lasted 4 minutes. When she hung up, her expression had hardened into something I had not seen before, a composite of anger and strategy, and the particular focus of a person who has just identified the move that will determine the rest of the game. My attorney confirms it. Recording someone in a private bedroom without consent is a felony under Colorado law. Wiretapping, invasion of privacy. If Marcus uses that footage, he incriminates himself. So we have leverage. We have a weapon. The question is when to use it. She set the dead camera on the dresser like evidence at a crime scene and turned to me. He wanted to catch us faking. He caught something else. I crossed the room and stood in front of her close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to meet my eyes. He caught the moment I stopped pretending. Something in her expression cracked open vulnerability and fear. Ingratitude braided together, and she pressed her forehead against my collarbone for 3 seconds before straightening, squaring her shoulders, and becoming the woman who ran a company. This changes everything. I know, but maybe it is time everything changed. We stood there, bare feet on the rug, the camera sitting between us on the dresser like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Outside voices were beginning to stir in the hallway. Somewhere in this house, Marcus was waiting, confident that his surveillance would deliver the evidence he needed. The drive back to Denver stretched longer than the road warranted. Vivian kept her eyes forward, jaw set, the camera riding in the cup holder between us, with the passive menace of unexploded ordnance. He bugged the room, his own sister's bedroom. He wants proof. He believes if he can show the board the marriage is manufactured, he takes everything, my share, my seat, the company. What did the camera actually capture? She hesitated. When she answered, her voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with corporate strategy. It captured me forgetting to act. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the car. The days after the estate visit escalated in ways I had not prepared for, because preparation implies you know what is coming, and Marcus operated on a timeline only he could see. Vivian's assistant forwarded emails that arrived like precision strikes. Copies of my old debt records sourced from public filings and reassembled into a narrative of financial desperation. Scans of pages from our contract, redacted but recognizable. Grainy stills from the bedroom camera, 2 figures in intimate proximity, time-stamped and annotated. He sent them to 4 board members. Vivian told me her tablet open on the kitchen island, her face lit from below by the screen, in a way that made her look older and more tired than her 31 years. He is building a case for the quarterly meeting. He wants them ready to vote me out. The penthouse, which had gradually begun to feel like something approaching home, turned into a war room. Vivian barely slept. She paced the living room at night, phone pressed to her ear, a laptop open on the coffee table, fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously with a stamina that was impressive and frightening in equal measure. I helped where I could, which initially meant keeping out of the way and making sure there was food and water within her reach, because Vivian under siege had the self-preservation instincts of someone who had never learned that taking care of yourself was not the same as admitting weakness. Then Marcus turned his attention to me. The call from HR came on a Wednesday morning. Caleb, could you come up to the 14th floor? The voice on the phone was polite and neutral, which in corporate language meant the conversation was going to be neither of those things. The HR director, a woman named Janet Pullman, who wore reading glasses on a chain and delivered bad news with the compassion of a parking meter, sat across a small table in a windowless conference room, and explained that the department had received information suggesting my relationship with the vice president might not be authentic. She used the word information as if it were a clinical term rather than a weapon someone had placed in her hands. Pending investigation, I was being placed on paid administrative leave effective immediately. I walked out of the building carrying a box with my laptop, a coffee mug Bill Whitaker had given me with a faded Broncos logo, and the framed photo of my parents that I kept on my desk. The lobby security guard held the door and would not meet my eyes. Behind the glass walls of the ninth floor, I could see people watching, heads turning with the synchronized curiosity of a flock reacting to movement. The Whisper Network would have the story circulating before I reached the parking garage. The copywriter who married the boss to clear his debts. The desperate man who sold himself to a woman with a checkbook. I sat in the penthouse alone that afternoon and felt the full weight of what had been taken. Not the job, which I had never loved. Not the paycheck, which had never been enough. What Marcus had stripped away was the one thing I had brought into this arrangement that belonged entirely to me. The ability to walk into a room and be seen as someone who earned his place through work. That was gone now, replaced by a story I could not control, authored by a man whose grievance against his sister had made me collateral damage. My father's voice surfaced in the silence as it always did when the ground shifted. You work with your hands. You keep your word. Nobody takes that from you. But they had taken it, or at least they had buried it under a version of me that was louder and easier to believe. That night, my phone rang. Mom. I stared at the screen for 4 rings before answering, knowing what was coming, because the internet moves faster than love, and someone in Diane Mercer's orbit had seen something and said something, and now the woman who had raised me to be honest was calling to ask about a lie. Caleb. Her voice was shaking in a way I had only heard once before the night she called to tell me the doctors had found the mass in my father's lung. You got married and did not tell me? The sentence landed like a physical blow. And people are saying online that you did it for money, that this woman paid you. I closed my eyes. The penthouse windows showed the city lights, thousands of lives flickering in the dark, and none of them felt as distant as the one I was living. Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. I told her, not everything but enough. The debts, the eviction, the offer, the contract. And then because I owed her more than a transaction summary, I told her about the nights on the couch when Vivian asked about her, about the laugh in the office, about the kiss that was not in any document, about the fact that what started as desperation had become something I did not have a clean word for. The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that I checked to make sure the call had not dropped. When Diane spoke, her voice was steady in the way that only comes from a lifetime of absorbing shocks without breaking. Your father would say what Caleb... The question cut through me with the surgical precision of a woman who knew exactly which nerve she was touching. My father, who never lied about anything that mattered. My father, who worked with his hands and kept his word and taught me that a man's integrity was the one thing no one could repossess. My father, who also refused to tell my mother he was sick until the coughing made it impossible to hide. And that stubbornness, that refusal to share his burden, was the crack in his armor that killed him. I learned how to carry things alone from a man who died because he carried things alone. And I was sitting in a glass tower 40 floors above Denver, doing exactly the same thing. The tears came without permission. Not the quiet, dignified kind. The kind that break open something you have been holding shut for months, ugly and honest and long overdue. I am sorry, Mom. I should have called you first, before any of it. Another silence. Then Diane's voice, gentler now, the nurse's steadiness replacing the mother's hurt. You made me hurt, Caleb, but I am not angry because you signed a piece of paper. I am angry because you did not pick up the phone. You are just like your father. He would not tell me he was sick until he could not hide it anymore. And look where that got us. The words were a lesson and a wound delivered simultaneously, and I received them both because I had earned them both. Is she good to you? Diane asked. This woman. She is, Mom. She is better than she knows how to be. Then bring her to meet me, when you are ready, not before. The call ended, and I sat in the dark for a long time, feeling the particular emptiness that comes after you have finally told the truth to someone who deserved to hear it months ago. Vivian came home late. She found me by the window, and she did not ask what happened because the evidence was on my face. She knew about HR. She knew about Marcus leaking to a local business blogger a story titled With Calculated Cruelty about the VP who hired a husband to keep her inheritance. The article was scheduled to publish by the weekend. She stood beside the window, arms crossed, reflected in the glass against the city lights, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked small, not diminished, compressed. None of her strength concentrated into a space too tight to sustain. I learned to be strong because no one ever gave me room to be anything else. Her voice came out raw, a confession aimed at the glass rather than at me. My father expected it. My mother measured it. Marcus tested it. The board demanded it. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that strength was supposed to be a choice, not a cage. I moved to stand beside her. Our reflections overlapped in the window, two figures suspended against the nightscape, separate and together. I am scared, Caleb, not of losing the company. I have lost things before, positions, opportunities, people. I know how that works. I am scared of losing you. You are not going to lose me. Not because of him, not because of the contract. I am here because of you, not the money. People will say you used me. They will call you a fraud. You could lose everything. Then let them talk. We know what is real. That is what matters. The words left my mouth with more certainty than I felt because fear was still scratching at the back of my skull, reminding me that the board had real power, and Marcus had real ammunition, and the world outside this window had already started writing a story about us that we might never be able to correct. But I had spent my entire adult life letting fear make my decisions, letting debt dictate my choices, letting the gap between where I was and where I wanted to be paralyze me into inaction. And standing beside this woman who had shown me her fear in exchange for nothing, who had trusted me with her weakness because she had run out of people to be strong, for I realized that the only thing more terrifying than fighting was continuing to hide. The next morning I did something Vivian did not expect. I did something I did not entirely expect. I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop, and I used the only skill I had that no diploma certified and no algorithm could replicate. I wrote. First, I called Ray Whitfield, a reporter at the Denver Post I had known from my freelance days, a man who wrote about business and law with the kind of rigor that made PR departments nervous. I did not pitch him an attack on Marcus. I pitched him a story about trust provisions that require marriage as a condition of inheritance, a legal mechanism that disproportionately affects women in family businesses, a real issue with documented cases across the country. The Ashford situation was the hook, but the story was bigger than one family. Then I opened a blank document and wrote the most honest thing I had ever put into words. A long essay, not a defense, not an attack, a narrative. My father's cancer, the bills, the drowning, the offer, the contract. And then the part I had not expected to write, the part about the woman who hired a husband and accidentally found one, and the man who sold a year of his life and discovered it was the first year he had actually lived. I published it on LinkedIn because that was where the professional world would see it. Within 6 hours, it had been shared 4,000 times. Within 12 hours, the comments section had turned into a forum where people argued about class and debt and love and the impossible choices that ordinary Americans make every day when the system leaves them no good options. Some called me a fraud. Some called me brave. Most just recognized the story as one version of a struggle they understood because they had lived something close to it. This was the moment my father's teaching came full circle. Not the mechanical skills, though those had their place. The deeper lesson, that a man's value is not determined by his tax bracket or his job title or the size of his apartment. It is determined by what he does when every comfortable option has been removed and only the hard ones remain. I could not outspend Marcus. I could not outmaneuver him in a boardroom. But I could write the truth in a way that made people feel it, and that skill, the one I had been wasting on taglines for regional beer companies, turned out to be the most valuable tool I owned. Vivian read the essay standing at the kitchen island. She did not speak until she reached the end. When she looked up, her eyes were bright in a way that was not clinical or strategic. You did not ask my permission. No. Good. 2 days later, I met Marcus at a coffee shop near the office. He had requested the meeting through a text that was polite enough to be threatening. He sat across from me in a booth near the window, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his espresso untouched, and for the first time since I had known him, the public mask was off. He looked tired, not the performative exhaustion of a man seeking sympathy, the genuine fatigue of someone who has been fighting so long he has forgotten what peace feels like. My father never called me on my birthday. He started without preamble, staring at the table. Every year, my birthday would come and the phone would ring, and it would be an aunt or my mother or a board member sending regards on his behalf. Never him. He called Vivian every single time. I brought digital revenue from nothing to 40% of total billings. He still wrote her name on the trust. I listened without interrupting because the story was not for my benefit. It was for his. He needed someone to hear it who was not a lawyer or a board member or a family member with an agenda. I understand not being seen. I understand building something and having it overlooked. I meant it. My father had built engines that kept trucks on the road for hundreds of thousands of miles and no one ever knew his name. But you put a camera in your sister's bedroom. You leaked personal financial records. You turned a family dispute into a public demolition. I paused and the next words came out carrying the weight of everything I had learned about the distance between grievance and cruelty. That is not fighting for what you deserve. That is revenge wearing a suit. Marcus's jaw tightened, his fingers wrapped around the espresso cup without lifting it. For a moment, I thought he would stand up and leave, and part of me hoped he would because the conversation was harder than I had anticipated. Instead, he sat very still, and in the silence between us, I saw something I had not expected to find. Not anger, exhaustion. The bone-deep tiredness of a man who had been running toward a finish line that kept moving. He left without responding. I sat with my coffee and thought about the fact that I had just spent $12 on a drink for a man who was trying to destroy my life, and the absurdity of it felt almost funny in a way that nothing else about this situation did. The quarterly board meeting was 5 days away. Vivian and her attorney assembled their position with the methodical intensity of generals planning a campaign. Evidence that the camera constituted a felony. Financial performance data showing the company's growth under Vivian's leadership. A comparative analysis of strategic contributions, Vivian's client retention and brand expansion weighed against Marcus's digital infrastructure, both substantial, both essential, the kind of data that made the case for partnership rather than rivalry, if anyone had been willing to see it that way. I helped write the presentation because that was where my hands could do the most good. Not under a hood this time, over a keyboard, structuring the narrative, sharpening the language, finding the emotional through line that would make a room full of people in expensive suits feel something real underneath the spreadsheets. Vivian and I worked side by side at the dining table until 2 a.m. papers spread across the surface, takeout containers pushed to the edges, and the domesticity of it, the simple partnership of two people solving a problem together, felt more like marriage than anything in the contract. Catherine called Vivian on the 4th night. I heard only Vivian's end of the conversation, but the way her spine straightened and her voice softened told me who was on the other end. When she hung up, she related in a voice that carried more layers than I could count. My mother knew about the contract from the beginning. I told her before I signed it. She did not stop me because she wanted me to learn the hard way that control's not everything. A pause, something bitter and grateful braided together. But Marcus planting cameras in my bedroom that crossed a line she will not forgive. She told me she will be at the meeting, and she will speak. The night before the vote, we sat on the floor of the penthouse, backs against the couch, the city glittering through the windows like a circuit board running on someone else's electricity. My shoulder touched hers. Neither of us moved away. Whatever happens in that room. Vivian's voice was steady in the way that told me steadiness was costing her everything she had. We do not turn on each other. Promise me. I promise. She turned her head and looked at me, and in the low light of the apartment, with the presentation printed and stacked on the dining table, and the board meeting 12 hours away, and Marcus Ashford sharpening his knives somewhere across the city, I saw in her eyes the thing she had spent her entire adult life hiding from everyone, including herself. Not the VP, not the founder's daughter. A woman who was terrified and exhausted and choosing to trust someone anyway. Not because the contract required it, but because she had decided against every instinct and every lesson her life had taught her that trusting me was worth the risk. I took her hand. She did not pull away. The city hummed 40 floors below, indifferent to the two people sitting on the floor of a borrowed life, holding on to each other because the morning was coming, and with it, the kind of reckoning that does not offer second chances. The elevator carried us to the 36th floor, and neither of us spoke during the ride. Vivian wore her dark blazer and the white blouse, simple and deliberate, the visual equivalent of a closing argument. I wore the gala suit, the only armor I had for a fight that would be decided by people who could buy my entire life with the interest on their savings accounts. She reached for my hand as the floor numbers climbed. Not the performative touch she used in lobbies and at events. This was a grip tight and real. Whatever happens in there, we already won the thing that matters. She looked at me, and for one breath, the elevator was not a machine carrying us toward a verdict. It was a small room where two people acknowledged something they had been building in the dark for months, brick by unplanned brick without blueprints or permission. The doors opened and the world rushed back in. The boardroom occupied the northeast corner of the floor, a long room with windows on two sides that let in the morning light at an angle designed to make everyone feel observed. A polished conference table ran down the center, surrounded by chairs that cost more than my first car. 14 seats, name placards at each position, water glasses filled to exactly the same level. The precision of it felt surgical, as if the room itself had been prepped for an operation. Board members filed in with the particular energy of people who know they are about to witness something consequential and have not yet decided whose side to take. I recognized faces from the gala and the estate men and women who managed portfolios and sat on multiple boards and evaluated human beings with the same metrics they applied to quarterly returns. They greeted each other with handshakes and murmured pleasantries, and beneath the civility, I could feel the current of anticipation running through the room like voltage through a wire. Marcus was already in position at the far end of the table, laptop open, a stack of printed documents fanned beside it in a display of preparedness that doubled as intimidation. He wore a suit I had not seen before, darker than his usual selections, and his expression carried the settled confidence of a man who believed the outcome had been determined before the meeting began. He nodded once in my direction, a greeting so minimal it barely qualified as acknowledgement, and returned his attention to his screen. Catherine Ashford entered last. She took a seat at the head of the table that I had not noticed was empty, and the room adjusted to her presence the way a compass adjusts to north. She wore a gray dress and no expression at all, her hands folded on the table in front of her, her attention moving across the assembled faces with the unhurried focus of someone who had been watching this family fracture for years and had chosen this morning to finally intervene. The first 40 minutes belonged to routine, quarterly revenue figures, campaign performance metrics, client retention data. A presentation about market positioning that a junior strategist delivered with the nervous precision of someone who understood the room's real agenda had nothing to do with market positioning. The numbers were solid. Ashford and Hale had grown 12% year over year under Vivian's leadership, a figure that under normal circumstances would have generated applause and renewed confidence. Under these circumstances, it generated silence because everyone at the table knew the numbers were the warm-up act. Marcus waited until the strategist had gathered her materials and exited before clearing his throat and standing. The room contracted around him. There is one more matter, a matter of trust and integrity that I believe this board has a responsibility to address. He nodded towards someone near the door. The overhead lights dimmed, the screen at the front of the room illuminated. The first image was a scan of our contract. My name, Vivian's name. The term spelled out in legal language that reduced a human arrangement to its transactional skeleton. Red circles drawn around the key provisions. The duration, the compensation. My debts itemized in a sidebar like a shopping list of desperation. The room shifted, chairs creaked, someone inhaled sharply enough to be heard. This is not a love story. Marcus spoke with the measured cadence of a man delivering a keynote, each word weighted and positioned for maximum effect. This is a transaction. My sister identified an employee in financial crisis and paid him to marry her in order to satisfy the terms of our father's trust and maintain control of this company. She lied to this board. She lied to our family. She lied to our clients and to the public. He clicked the remote. My old financial records filled the screen. Hospital bills with my father's name. Past due rent notices stamped in red. Credit card statements showing balances that climbed like fever charts. The intimacy of the exposure was staggering. My failure, my father's illness, my family's collapse projected in high definition for a room full of strangers to evaluate. This is the man she brought into the Ashford family. A man drowning in debt, compensated to play a role. Another click. The grainy stills from the bedroom camera appeared. Two figures in proximity time-stamped the images, blurred enough to preserve technical decency, but clear enough to be unmistakably us. The room's temperature dropped. Someone at the far end of the table leaned back in their chair, as if the screen might contaminate them. Even their intimacy was performance. They knew there were terms. They knew there were eyes on them. Every moment of this marriage was manufactured. This is fraud. Marcus let the word hang in the room like smoke from a fire that had already done its damage. He closed his laptop with a decisive click and folded his arms, settling back into his chair with the patient satisfaction of a man who had just played his final card and believed it was an ace. The room held its breath. I looked at Vivian. She was already looking at the table, not at Marcus, not at the screen, not at the board members whose judgment would determine the next chapter of her life. She was looking at the wood grain in front of her as if it contained a map to a decision she had been approaching for months and had finally reached. She stood slowly. The motion pulled every eye in the room toward her with gravitational force. Yes, the word dropped into the silence like a stone into a well, and the sound it made on impact rearranged every assumption in the room. The marriage started as a contract. I will not lie to you. I will not stand here and pretend that the origin of this arrangement was romantic. It was not. She paused, and in the pause, I heard the cost of what she was doing, the public surrender of the control she had spent her entire career constructing. I knew my brother was waiting for any opportunity to invoke the trust provisions and take everything I had built. I made a strategic decision, an imperfect one I am not proud of. I identified a man I trusted, and I offered him an arrangement that served both of our needs. Marcus shifted in his chair, preparing to interject, and Vivian's gaze found him with a precision that pinned him to his seat. I have spent years growing this company, supporting the teams, the clients, the campaigns that keep us competitive. I was not willing to let my brother's maneuvering undo that work, so I did something desperate. I own that. Her voice changed then, not louder, not softer, different. The corporate register fell away, and what remained was something I had only heard in private in the penthouse at 2 a.m, in the bedroom at the estate, in the moments when the woman behind the title allowed herself to exist. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being fake. She turned to look at me and the boardroom with its polished table and its power dynamics and its 14 chairs and its projected evidence dissolved into background noise. I brought a man into my home who had nothing left, and I watched him show up anyway. Every morning, without complaint, without self-pity, I watched him send money to his mother when his account was nearly empty. I watched him fix things that were broken without being asked, because that is who he is. I watched him stand up to my brother at a dinner table and speak about me with a respect I had never heard from anyone who was not trying to sell me something, and I fell in love with him. The murmurs swelled through the room like a tide finding new shore. Board members exchanged glances. Marcus's expression tightened by increments, the confidence thinning at the edges. My turn. I stood. My legs felt heavy, but my voice came out clear, carrying across the room with the kind of calm that belongs to men who have already lost the things they were most afraid of losing and have discovered that the other side of that fear is a strange, clean freedom. Marcus is right about one thing. I was desperate when I signed. My father died of lung cancer last year. The treatment bills were more than my family could survive. I was 3 months from living in my car. When Vivian showed me that contract, I thought it was a cold trade. Time for money, survival for pretending. I looked at her. She was watching me with eyes that held none of their usual armor open and waiting the most vulnerable I had ever seen her in a room full of people. She did not buy a husband. She pulled a man out of a hole and made him want to stand up straight for the first time in years. I turned back to the table. 14 faces, some sympathetic, some skeptical, all paying attention. I love her, not the vice president, not the Ashford name, not the penthouse or the title or the trust. The woman who works until midnight because she is terrified of letting people down. The woman who cries alone looking at photographs of her father. The woman who learned to be strong because nobody in her life ever gave her permission to be anything else. The room went quiet in a way that felt physical, as if the silence had weight and texture pressing against the walls and the windows, and the people sitting in their expensive chairs trying to decide what to do with a story that did not fit any of their models. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, and a voice cut through the room from a direction no one was expecting. Enough! Catherine Ashford rose from her chair at the head of the table with the deliberate grace of a woman who had been silent by choice and intended the end of that silence to mean something. She placed both hands on the polished surface and let the room settle around her authority. I knew about the contract. She spoke directly, without preamble, without apology, each word landing with the precision of a woman who had raised 2 children and buried a husband and navigated 30 years of corporate politics and family damage, and had decided that this was the morning she stopped watching from the sidelines. Vivian came to me before she signed it. I did not stop her, not because I approved, because I wanted her to learn the hard way, if necessary, that control is not everything, that you cannot manage your way out of every problem, that sometimes the plan fails, and what saves you is the thing you did not plan for. She turned to face Marcus, and the temperature in the room dropped by a degree that had nothing to do with the climate system. But you, Marcus. The word carried the weight of a mother addressing a child she loved and a man she no longer recognized. You planted a camera in your sister's bedroom, in my home, in a room where my late husband used to sleep. The room absorbed that detail with a collective stillness that was worse than gasps. Your father, my husband, made mistakes with you, I know that. He favored Vivian in ways that were not fair. He overlooked your contributions. He wrote a trust that put your sister in a cage and expected her to be grateful for the view. I should have spoken up sooner. I should have fought for you the way you needed me to fight. That failure is mine, and I will carry it. Marcus's face had gone the color of paper. His composure, the polished surface he had maintained through months of strategic aggression, cracked along a fault line he had not known existed. His mother's acknowledgement of his pain was the one weapon he had not prepared a defense against. But the way you chose to respond, cameras in bedrooms, leaking private records, trying to destroy your sister's reputation and her marriage because you believe you were wronged, that is not leadership. That is not justice. That is cruelty. And under Colorado law, it is a felony. Catherine turned to the board, and the shift in her attention carried the force of a spotlight. I am asking you to look at what Vivian has done for this company. Look at the numbers. Look at the clients she retained during the pandemic. Look at the campaigns she built. Then look at what Marcus has done in the shadows. The surveillance, the leaked documents, the calculated demolition of his own family for competitive advantage. And ask yourselves who you trust. Not with money, with people. The silence that followed was the kind that rearranges outcomes. Every person in that room recalculated not with spreadsheets, but with instinct, the primal evaluation humans make when forced to choose between 2 versions of power, one that builds and one that tears down. The vote, when it came, moved through the room like a wave reaching shore. The motion to remove Vivian from her position failed by a margin of 9-3 with 2 abstentions. A second motion, initiated by a board member who had watched the entire proceeding with the focused intensity of a man who had already made up his mind, called for a review of Marcus's conduct. The result was decisive. Marcus Ashford would be required to resign his operational role and surrender his committee positions. He would retain his minority shares because the trust guaranteed them, but his authority within the company was functionally ended. A confidentiality agreement would be drafted. In exchange for his departure without legal action on the camera incident, Vivian agreed not to pursue criminal charges. It was not a clean victory. Marcus would still own a piece of the company. His name would still be on the building. The business blogger's article was still circulating online, collecting comments and shares and feeding a narrative that would not die with a single board vote. Some members who voted in Vivian's favor did so with visible reluctance, their loyalty, temporary and conditional, the kind of support that requires continuous earning. But Marcus's teeth had been pulled. His committees were gone. His operational influence was gone. The man who had spent a decade building something real and a year trying to destroy something equally real walked out of the boardroom with his jaw set and his eyes fixed on a middle distance that held nothing but the shape of what he had just lost. I heard later through Catherine that Marcus had relocated to Portland, taken a consulting role at a digital firm, and was slowly rebuilding on his own terms. He did not reach out to Vivian. She did not reach out to him. But Catherine visited him twice that fall because a mother's work does not end when the boardroom clears. When the room emptied, when the handshakes and the murmured congratulations and the carefully non-committal wishes for the future had dispersed, Vivian and I stepped into an empty hallway. The door closed behind us with a soft click that sounded different than every other closing door I had heard in this building. This one sounded like an ending and a beginning, occupying the same space. The months that followed carried the 12-month contract past its expiration without ceremony. We did not mark the date. There was no toast, no formal dissolution, no legal proceeding to undo what we had signed. The document simply became irrelevant, overtaken by a reality that had outgrown the terms designed to contain it. One evening after the 12 months had quietly passed, Vivian opened the drawer where we kept the contract, looked at it for a moment, and closed the drawer again without taking it out. That was the closest we came to acknowledging the milestone. "The contract is over," she said, leaning against the kitchen counter. "We could walk away now, clean. Is that what you want?" She shook her head. The motion was small and certain. "The contract can end. I do not want us to." I stepped closer. We were standing at the penthouse kitchen, surrounded by takeout containers and campaign briefs and the accumulated evidence of a life being lived rather than performed, and none of it was beautiful and all of it was real. "Then let us end the contract and stay married for real." A tear slid down her cheek. I caught it with my thumb gently and with purpose, because tenderness and precision are not opposites, and my father taught me both. "Do you remember the question you asked the first day in my office? The one I will never live down. You asked if we had to sleep in the same bed. I said no. It was safer, cleaner, fewer complications." She took my hand and placed it over her heart, and I could feel it beating fast and strong, a rhythm that no contract could have predicted. "If I asked you that question, now what would you say?" "I would say yes. I want to share your bed, your house, your mornings, your storms. Not for a year, for as long as you will have me." Her eyes shone with something that was not control or strategy or the careful management of appearances. It was the expression of a woman who had spent her entire life building walls and had just watched someone walk through the last one without breaking it down, simply stepping through the opening she had finally chosen to leave unlocked. "Good, because I am tired of pretending I sleep better alone." The Pennant House sold in 9 days. We bought a house on a quiet street in a neighborhood called Hilltop, with a porch that wrapped around 2 sides and a yard with a cottonwood tree that dropped leaves on the lawn every autumn. The kitchen had a window over the sink that looked out at the mountains, and when the light came through in the late afternoon, it turned the countertops gold. 3 bedrooms, which was more space than I had ever lived in, and less than Vivian was accustomed to, and neither of us mentioned the difference because the house was not about square footage. It was about choosing something together that belonged to the life we were building rather than the one we had been performing. I did not go back to Ashford and Hale. The name Caleb Mercer still appeared in search results, alongside words I would not have chosen, and walking into that building every day would have meant living inside a story other people had written about me. Instead, I took a position at a smaller agency, 12 people in a converted warehouse in the River North Arts District, where the coffee was terrible and the work was good, and the people knew my name because of what I wrote, not because of who I married. At night after dinner at our own table, I wrote, not copy, not campaigns, the real writing, the kind I had abandoned in my Capitol Hill apartment when the debt was too heavy and the future was too dark. I wrote about medical debt in America, about the choices families make when insurance runs out and the bills keep coming, about class and pride and the invisible architecture that keeps people trapped in circumstances they did not build. A small magazine in Boulder published the first piece. A larger one in Denver picked up the second. The money was modest. The work was mine. Vivian kept her position but changed its shape. The board, chastened by the ugliness of the meeting and the public scrutiny that followed, gave her more latitude and less interference. She used it to restructure the leadership team, promoting people who had been overlooked and redistributing responsibilities in ways that acknowledged the company needed more than one person carrying everything. She came home earlier now, not every night, but enough nights that the kitchen table became a place where we ate together rather than a surface for stacking campaign briefs. Diane came to Denver in October. She arrived on a Thursday afternoon flight from Austin, carrying one suitcase and wearing a blue cardigan that I recognized from every family photograph taken in the last 15 years. I picked her up at the airport, and she hugged me for a long time in the arrivals lane without saying anything, and the silence was not awkward or punishing. It was the silence of a mother who had decided to meet the present on its own terms. I noticed she was not coughing. When I asked, she told me she had finally gone to the doctor the way she had been telling me to do things my entire life while ignoring the same advice herself. Bronchitis, not anything worse. Antibiotics and rest. The Mercer stubbornness had bent just enough, and I understood that my phone call, the one where I finally told her the truth, had cracked something open in both of us. If I could stop hiding, so could she. She stayed for a week. She and Vivian cooked together on the second night Diane's chicken and dumplings, the recipe she had learned from her own mother in a kitchen, not much different from the one they were standing in now, and watching the two of them move around each other with the careful choreography of women who were still learning each other's rhythms. I felt something inside my chest that I had not felt since my father was alive. Not happiness exactly. Wholeness. The sense that the pieces of a life that had been scattered across hospitals and courtrooms and corporate offices and empty apartments had finally been gathered into the same room. Before she left, Diane took my hand at the front door and held it the way she used to hold it when I was a boy, and the world was large, and she was the safest thing in it. She is not who I imagined for you. A pause, and the smile that followed was complicated and true. She is better. A warm evening in late November. The kind of Colorado night where the air carries the first real chill of the season, but the sky holds onto the light long enough to make you believe summer is a promise rather than a memory. We sat on the porch swing, coffee in hand, the cottonwood leaves scattered across the yard in patterns that the wind rearranged every few minutes. The dog we had adopted in September, a barrel-chested mutt from the shelter who barked at nothing which felt familiar, was asleep at our feet on a blanket he had claimed as personal property. If you could go back, Vivian's voice was soft, addressed partly to me and partly to the mountains. To the day in my office when I slid that folder across the desk. Would you still sign? I let the question settle because it deserved more than a reflex. I thought about my father's bills, the red stamps, the numbers that had compressed my life into a series of obligations I could not meet. I thought about the apartment with its peeling paint and its rattling heater, and the eviction notice with its circled date. I thought about her eyes across the desk, sharp and calculating, and hiding something she would not let me see. I thought about the year that followed, the gala and the estate and the camera and the boardroom. Marcus and Catherine and Diane in the kitchen making dumplings. The essay I wrote at 3 a.m. The faucet I fixed when no one asked me to. This porch. I would sign faster because that was the day the pretending started and the day I started walking toward you. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and the weight of it was light and permanent. The kind of pressure that means someone has stopped holding themselves up and has chosen to rest against you instead, and the choosing is everything. The marriage had started as a deal, a contract printed on paper and signed by two people who needed each other for reasons that had nothing to do with love. The terms were clear, the duration was specified, the compensation was agreed upon. Everything was calculated to the last comma, engineered to survive scrutiny, designed to end. But sitting on that porch with the night settling soft around us and the mountains turning invisible against a darkening sky, I knew there was nothing calculated left. No terms, no duration, no exit clause. Just two people who had walked into an arrangement expecting to pretend and had accidentally built something that could bear the weight of truth. My boss once told me to pretend to be her husband for 1 year. Now, every time I look at her, every time I wake up and find her beside me in the early light, every time I hear her laugh at something that is not even that funny, But she laughs anyway because the walls are down and the guards have gone home. I know that my answer has changed. Nobody owes you anything. You want something, go earn it. But when someone gives you a chance, do not waste it. My father said that in a garage in Texas with grease on his hands, impatience in his voice, and I did not understand what it meant until a woman I barely knew slid a folder across a desk and gave me the most unlikely chance of my life. I did not waste it.